Hi, I'm Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And you are listening to the Personality Hacker Podcast.
So, a mentor of mine one time told me this story. And it goes like this. And Joel just said to say a mentor of mine once told me the story is the personal development way of saying once upon a time.
It is.
Which I think is awesome. So, once upon a time, there was this dude in South America who was crossing a border from one country into another and ended up talking to a border patrol. And the guy said, okay, so I'm going to have to check you out and make sure you're not smuggling anything. So he checks the guy out. The guy's riding a donkey, checks out the donkey. He says, okay, you're free to go by. And then the next day, the guy comes back with the exact same situation. He crosses the border patrol looks at him, looks at the donkey, and goes, okay, well, that's interesting that you're crossing again, but you seem to check out, so go ahead and go on your way. Well, the guy comes the next day, and the next, and the next. And now the border patrol man is getting really suspicious. He's like, I'm going to have to check you out a little more carefully, sir. So he checks him out pretty carefully, checks out the donkey, goes, I can't really see that you're smuggling anything, but I'm going to let you go by. The same thing happens again for the next 2 weeks, next month, next 6 months, etc. And every time the border patrolman knows that the guy's smuggling something. He's like, what are you smuggling? I can't figure it out. I check you up and down, I check the donkey up and down, and I cannot figure out what you're smuggling, but I know you're smuggling something. So apparently 20 years goes by of this little song and dance. At the end of the 20 years, the border patrolman is, he's retiring. He's no longer going to be a border patrolman. So he tells the guy, who now he has a 20-year relationship with, he says, okay, look, today's my last day. I'm retiring. You and I have been doing the song and dance for the last 20 years. I check you out. I check the donkey out. I know you're smuggling something. If you tell me, I promise I won't tell anybody else. I promise. I just have to know. Are you smuggling something? And the guy looks at him and goes, really? You're not gonna tell anybody? He's like, no, I swear I won't tell anybody. Really? You promise you're not gonna give my secret away? The guy goes, Scout's honor, on my deathbed, I mean, like, cross my heart, hope to die, I swear I won't tell anyone. So the guy leans into him and he goes, I'm smuggling donkeys. Okay, so this could be a fantastic metaphor and illustration for a lot of different things. And I suspect this metaphor, this story has been told for a lot of different contexts because it's such a great story to indicate we're missing something that's just right under our nose. However, the context that my mentor was talking about it in was specifically about emotions.
Yeah.
He likened the times when we are using a situation to experience an emotion that has been wanting to get out, but we're not comfortable with the emotion. We don't want it to come out in the way that will make us feel icky. So we use another situation, totally unrelated, or usually unrelated, to experience that emotion or finally get it out. And he called it donkey smuggling, which I thought was really interesting.
We've all had this happen to us when your significant other comes home from work and you're like, hey, can you help me with such and such or something? And all of a sudden they explode at you in anger. And you're like, what in the world did I say or do just now? And it's like this big deal or some fight happens over something that seems benign. It's probably an emotion that's been festering all day of some other sort. It might be toward you or another person that they've been interacting with, or it might just be something that's stacked. But now they're using this situation to express an emotion that they don't feel they can do authentically. Just to say, hey, I'm upset about this. They have to allow it come out and bubble up in some other way. So I'm sure you have examples of this in your life as you're listening and you're thinking through, oh yeah, this has happened. And it's the thing I'm noticing about it is it's so much easier. Oftentimes it can be easier to see other people doing this than myself. Like,
oh yeah,
I don't realize I'm smuggling emotions half the time.
Oh yeah.
But if you come and you have an emotion, I'm like, oh, maybe she's smuggling. Maybe she's angry about something else. Like I can kind of identify it in someone else. When I'm doing it, I'm like, no, this is what's actually going on. And then if I'm really introspective and I think about it, oh, maybe I'm upset about this other thing. Or I'm sad about this other thing, or whatever the experience is.
Yeah, well, I'm a consummate smuggler.
Yeah.
Like, I'm real good at it. And one of the reasons is, in a previous podcast, we revealed that I'm a thinker female and Joel is a feeler male. And so while that doesn't mean that I don't have emotions or he doesn't have the ability to be analytical, it does inform our interests, and it does inform our comfort levels with certain things. In fact, we were just talking about it today. Joel is really into media. You're really into creating media.
Yeah, absolutely.
And every time we have this conversation about a subject that's very evocative, you end up saying, that's a great movie idea. I'd love to make a movie about that. And whenever you say that, I'm always like so horrified, because I'm like, if I watched that movie, I would probably be bursting into tears. I wouldn't be able to deal with that level of emotion, and I would never see the movie. I might love the movie, but I would never be able to see it again, because it would just totally emotionally overwhelm me.
Yeah.
By the same token, we were also talking about how whenever anybody else says, that's data overload, I've got too much information in my head, I've just got to go process it or think, I'm always surprised by this, because I'm like, well, the brain has
possible?
You're right. The brain has the infinite ability to contain data in it, and I'm never data overloaded, but I am definitely emotionally overloaded. And so when I'm experiencing an emotion that is too much for me in the moment, I definitely contain it, put it in a little box, set it on some shelf, and go, oh, I'll deal with that later. And then the emotion, because I like this beautiful little packaging that I think I'm doing, this beautiful little I'll set that aside and tend to it later. I might never attend to it, but it doesn't matter because the emotion will come out, right?
Yeah.
It's much, much stronger than whatever packaging I put around it. And then suddenly I'm flipping out about, a toothpaste situation, right? You and I actually have different toothpaste. You don't even keep your toothbrush.
That solves the problem right there.
Yeah, you don't even keep your toothbrush anywhere near my toothbrush. But that's the stereotypical issue in the marriage, right? Is that, the cap isn't on the toothpaste or whatever.
Which, as a kid, I always thought, why don't you just buy 2 tubes of toothpaste? Doesn't that just make sense? Then there's no fights. And the marriage is bliss at that point.
Yeah. And so what's interesting is that I still find ways to smuggle, even though the toothpaste controversy has been solved through your amazing foresight. However, that said, I definitely find ways to smuggle. And so this has been a wonderful model for me as somebody who is forever, chasing after emotional intelligence.
And for our audience,
at its heels.
Yeah, for our audience, it's probably, if you spent any time around Antonia and I, you'd probably be like, man, these guys are weird people. Because, in fact, I think we've had some family members and friends look at us like, what in the world? We'll be in the middle of conversation and we'll literally stop. A real conversation is happening and say, I think I'm smuggling an emotion here. Or I think and we'll call it out.
Yeah.
And it's kind of weird for other people because that's very weird for people that don't call stuff out like that. For us to be
going meta on the conversation.
Hey, I think you're smuggling an emotion. Something else is going on for you because you're reacting in a way that's totally not what the situation's about. So what's going on? And we stop and we try to deal with what's happening.
Right. Well, and that actually reminds me of the criteria that was described to me of what an emotional smuggle, how to identify one.
Yeah.
The easiest way to identify a smuggle is if your emotional response is totally disproportionate to the situation. It doesn't make any sense that you would be that mad or that sad or that frustrated or whatever the emotion is. It doesn't make any sense that it would be that intense for the context or for the situation. That is almost invariably a smuggle.
Yeah. And I would also say the other pattern I've noticed is that we as humans have a tendency to have an emotion we allow ourselves to feel. So we have a preferred emotion that we allow our emotions to come through. And if we have another emotion that we don't feel permission to express, we'll often channel it into the emotion we feel like we can't express. So, for example, and this happens to men, I think, in our culture, that we're cultured that expressing maybe sadness is not appropriate. We're not allowed to cry or emote in that way. But anger is totally appropriate. It's okay in our culture for guys to be angry, but not necessarily to be sad or, depressed or something like that. And so oftentimes what I've seen people do, not just men, women as well, but we'll take an emotion that could come out as sadness, but say, I don't have permission to come out that way. I'm going to channel this and I'm going to come out angry. And it seems so weird to the other person. Like, why are you getting angry right now? It's because they're feeling something they don't have permission to feel. And so they just allow it to bubble up in another way.
Yeah.
And I think that's another way that smuggling can present itself, because you feel like you've got permission with this one emotion that you prefer and that you feel permission around.
Totally. I've totally noticed that people have a preferred strategy for dealing with whatever ickiness or discomfort that they're experiencing. I know that for me. There are certain emotions that are acceptable. And usually it's not just that they're, like, for me, it's not because of socialization. I'm fortunate enough to feel, a certain amount of freedom for expressing all emotions. I mean, I don't know if that's because I'm female or if it's because of the household I was raised in or whatever. So that's nice that I have that permission. However, I have preferred strategies.
Yeah.
Strategies that I'm really familiar with, and I know how they play out, and I know how they pan out, and I know how I feel about them before, during, and after. And so I'll have go-to strategies. We'll probably mention the personality psychology system, the Enneagram, in a future podcast and go into it fairly in some depth. Well, probably not in super depth, because it's a pretty comprehensive system. It's hard to address it in a single 20 to 30 minute podcast.
57 podcast episode
exactly.
course.
Exactly. However, the Enneagram is a system that indicates that we have a tendency to favor one of three, and I'm going to call them gross emotions, because it takes different flavors. And those three are anger, shame, and fear. So you can kind of tell the people who have a tendency to favor fear because they get nervous, they experience a lot of anxiety issues, they get real stressed out when they feel threatened in any way, and that's generally people who gravitate towards some sort of fear strategy. And then you've got people who have an anger strategy. And the people who have anger strategies are usually the ones who jump to some form of anger. And then you've got the people who are in shame. And shame is generally reflected back onto the individual. It's something where, if something goes wrong, well, it must be my fault that it went wrong. Anger usually it's somebody else's fault. And fear is like, oh God, something's going wrong, right? It doesn't necessarily have to deal with fault. It's just anxiety and stress around it. So that's like the most bare bones, incredibly oversimplified way of describing the Enneagram. That said, even if you remove the word Enneagram, I still find it an interesting model to talk about gravitating towards one of these three strategies. And because of that, I'm in the shame triad. I'm totally comfortable with shame. Right? Like a lot of my smuggles end up being that if I experience something that's uncomfortable, I bring it back in on myself, and I'm a terrible person, and I start self-sabotaging big time.
Yeah. And I would say that I'm probably more in the fear triad, where I tend to have a lot of anxieties that I'm working through in some ways. And now there's obviously different development levels of these that obviously we can't go into all these nuanced steps, but this is a gross oversimplification, like you said. And I would say that I'm probably over there. And I know a lot of people that are in the anger triad that express emotion through either inward or outward or suppressed anger.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that's a good way to kind of think about maybe a default emotional smuggle place where you tend to go.
Yeah, what basket do you tend to put all your stuff in? And so another thing that I've noticed that I've done, going completely away from that model, the other thing that I've noticed that I have a tendency to do is allow stacks. Like, the first time something happens, and if it annoys me, I don't want to see myself as the kind of person who would get annoyed by that. And so because I'm dealing with a little dissonance, right? Like, I'm like, well, I wouldn't get annoyed by that. I allow it to stay there, and I don't address the annoyance. I don't change the situation or vocalize that I'm feeling annoyed. I just let the annoyance, because it's really small. And then the next time it happens, I feel the exact same thing. I'm like, okay, I'm annoyed. However, I'm not the kind of person who wants to see myself as getting annoyed by that. Now, though, I've got 2 layers of annoyance, and then I'll just let it stack until suddenly it is unacceptable, right? Like, I cannot deal with this anymore. And the same behavior that somebody's done 9 times, suddenly on the 10th time, I just absolutely blow a gasket, right? And I'm not okay with it at all. And I blow up at them, and they're like, dude, I've been doing this the whole time. And I'm like, I know, right?
Yeah.
And that's the stack that I've allowed. So sometimes that can appear as a smuggle as well. I'm not sure if that's quite the definition of a smuggle. I would say that's more of a emotional stack, but it's pretty related. So when the situation creates, an emotion that is way, way disproportionate to the situation, the other thing I've noticed is an emotional stack.
One thing that, as you're talking about that came to my mind is as I'm going through my personal development journey, when I was younger, like in my early on in personal development, I felt more permission to express emotions. And as I'm going through personal development, it's almost like, well, I should be more developed in this emotion I'm feeling. At least kind of how I feel, kind of similar to what you're talking about. Like, I can't be feeling that. I should be more developed than that silly emotion that's coming up for me. Mm-hmm. Maybe like the emotion of jealousy, for example. There's an emotion of jealousy coming on me. Well, I should be transcendent of this emotion of jealousy. I shouldn't have to feel this because I'm enlightened. I have growth. I've personally developed beyond supposed to feeling this, but this emotion feels real, but I'll suppress it, or I might smuggle it in another way because it feels undeveloped in some way, because it's not the thing I'm quote unquote supposed to feel. I'm supposed to have transcended this. Does that make sense?
Totally. Yeah. I think that's one of the biggest traps of being in personal development, is thinking that you're at a certain phase or a certain place, certain level where you're not quote unquote, like you said, you don't give yourself permission to feel things that's what other people who are not as developed do.
Exactly.
And I say that not to like go, there, Joel, like, that's a trap that you're experiencing. I mean, like, I'm still there. You can see this yin-yang sort of push-pull relationship that people in personal development have between their higher self, right, or their highest self that they try to maintain, that level, and then the moments when they just become like total catty, horrible, they're like sinking into their, they're not their higher self, they're at a lower level, right? And they're at that moment and you're like, but I've done all this work, right?
I'm
like
fearful.
I should
Yeah.
be, like I should be beyond this. I've done all this work. I should be beyond this. I shouldn't be feeling that. And then that doesn't get addressed.
Yeah.
And I think
Or it gets smuggled.
Or it gets smuggled,
yeah.
Right? Exactly. I think that giving yourself permission when you're on this journey to be at your lower self, like that's going to happen. We're going to overattach to our ego. We're going to in a moment believe that, like our identity is intrinsically linked to some belief we have or to some emotion we have. And that's the most important thing in the moment. Like, we're going to have that moment when we feel like that is massively, massively important. And it's just going to happen. Like, we're creatures that want to live. Our egos are, they're parts of us that want to be valued and to be acknowledged. And that it never goes away. Even if you've gotten to a point where you can, kind of watch your ego play and go, oh, that's really cute that Antonia is doing that. And look at what Antonia is doing now. And that's adorable. And like you have some distance from your ego and you sort of watch yourself work and you recognize that you are not your ego. And then there's this moment when somebody hurts your feelings and then boom, there is no ego separation. You are your ego.
Yeah.
Like you are, like I am me and you just hurt my feelings and blah.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know anybody where that doesn't happen at this point. I've heard tales of people, right? Like very famous people at higher levels of transcendence, and I've never met them.
Yeah.
So at this point, every person I've ever met has those moments. So giving yourself permission to have those moments when you're like, yeah, I'm kind of being a dick back there. Like I'm kind of being a dick right now. And I was kind of a dick back there too. It's okay. It's part of the journey.
So kind of as I'm thinking also through this too, this thought came to my mind just now. There's a distinction most likely between, I'm guessing that, and I think I've done this, and that's why I'm guessing this, so maybe our audience has been through this, and maybe you've been through this too, Antonia. There's a difference between understanding and embodying and holding space for your emotions and controlling them versus smuggling them. So in other words, I I wonder if sometimes when I'm smuggling emotion, I'm attempting to feel like I'm in control of that emotion, and it's not controlling me. And instead of authentically allowing that to come up and dealing with it in its authentic way, I'm kind of trying to control it too much, and so it comes off as a smuggle. Am I making some sense here? I mean, this is a thought that's loose in my head, but I'm trying to give it some actual sense making.
Yeah, like I'm containing the emotion, I'm dealing with it, and then you end up smuggling it anyway.
To some degree, yeah. And I think there's a distinction there, because I think that there is an authentic way to handle emotion. I mean, I guess what I'm trying to say is that what's the alternative of smuggling? Letting every emotion just blah out all the time? That's not healthy either. You know, just because you have anger doesn't mean you have to be angry in that moment. Doesn't mean to suppress it and then let it come out as sadness or depression either, but you need to have a healthy way to express these emotions, I guess what I'm trying to say. It seems like smuggling is an unhealthy way to take the emotions that are bubbling up, and you're trying to control them, but you're doing it in a way that's not, you're not handling them, you're trying to control them, or you're trying to like grab onto their foot before they get away, and you're trying to, you know, wrestle them back down to the ground in a way. And I know that probably sounds confusing the way I just said it, but you're looking at me very confused as if I'm just way out there. Maybe I need to clarify that thought some more, but there's something here that I think is interesting to me.
Yeah. Well, I'm not confused. I'm a little confused by the metaphor, but that's okay. I think I sort of saw it in a Peter Pan wrestling in shadow sort of way. Is that what you meant?
Sort of. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm just going to start talking, and you tell me whether or not I have any idea what you were referring to, and if not, then
no worries.
Shut me down. So, yeah, I think the reason why smuggling is not the preferred method is because of its unconscious nature.
Yeah.
And what you're talking about is I'm angry. This situation made me angry.
Yeah.
I'm aware of my anger. I'm acknowledging my anger. I might not have to like go seek the person and blast my anger upon them. However, I'm recognizing that anger is the emotion that I'm experiencing.
And it still has to be dealt with. It still has to be managed. It still has to be processed, if you will. I think that's what I was trying to say.
Yeah.
So it can't, suppression, it's going to smuggle out somewhere. So you've got to let the emotion rise up, process through it. And by doing that, that's going to eliminate that need for smuggle, basically is what I'm trying to say. So thank you for bringing that down and letting me clarify, because I think that's really what I was grasping at.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking through this in real time.
Well, in the same event that I heard this concept of donkey smuggling applied to emotions, they also mentioned that...
Oh, the loop.
Yeah. The loop is so fascinating. And this is, I think, effectively what you're talking about.
Exactly what I'm talking about. I just didn't say it as eloquently. Go ahead and talk about the loop. This is great.
Okay. Are you sure you...
No, go ahead. Go ahead. This is good.
Okay. Yeah, so here's what the loop is. When we experience an emotion and it starts, like it's a big one, right? Like it's powerful and it starts building, we will get to a point, or we can get to a point that we're really uncomfortable with the level of the intensity of this emotion. I know I experience this a lot where I'm like, I'm not okay with the intensity of, say, you used jealousy before. Jealousy is a fantastic one. I've never given myself permission to experience jealousy before, because that wasn't what I did, right? Like, women who were jealous were, in my opinion, women who were not seeing the big picture, and I didn't want to be one of them. Anybody who experienced jealousy, but in particular, members of my own gender. And so I was above all that. Well, come to find out, I'm not at all. Not even close. Like, I'm totally jealous. Like, I have big, moments of jealousy in which I am not at my higher self, and it's painful and I hate it. And now that I've given myself permission to deal with it, I'm much better about it. Before, it was totally repressed and suppressed. And I did it by seeing myself experience jealousy, feel a certain level of it, and then I would just like stop it in its tracks. So let's pretend jealousy has a thermostat of like 0 to 10. 10 being you're your face feels like it's going to explode in fire of jealousy, and 0 is like, right? Like there's no spark of jealousy at all. So for me, when I got to like 1 or 2, I would like shut it down, right? I'm like, oh, I don't feel that way. Then I realized I was smuggling and it was coming out in all sorts of terrible ways. And so I was going to allow myself to experience jealousy, especially after this particular event talked about the loop that people get stuck in. And what the loop is that when we get to a point of like 6 or 7 or whatever it is that we're not comfortable with, but it wanted to go to 10. Right? Like the emotion is powerful enough to want to go to 9 or 10, but we can't handle it past 6. We'll stop it at 6 and the thing gets caught in its own loop, right? Like it stays there.
Absolutely.
It's not able to get flushed out. It's not able to get washed out. You're not able to cleanse yourself of it or rid yourself of the emotion. It's just now stuck at 6. And now you're just feeling it and feeling it and feeling it and feeling it. And it's just like you have this lower level experience of an emotion that can't go away.
Yeah.
And so I had like a low grade sense of jealousy all the time because I stopped it at like 1 or 2. So it was just there all the time. So they said, go to 10 or 9 or 8 or whatever it is that it wants to go to. Just let it happen.
Process through it.
And they said, when you do that, like on a neurological level, the emotion cannot last past 8 minutes.
Yeah.
8 minutes. So
fully feel it. Like
fully experience it.
Go into it, feel it all the way.
Right. When it gets fully experienced, 8 minutes. So I had an experience of that, right? Like you and I were, we weren't actually together, but I knew we were both interacting with this third party. I thought, oh my gosh, you're going to think this girl's so hot, right? So charming, so hot, so cute, like so amazing. And as my jealousy built, like I was getting to 6 or 7 and it was intolerable. Because remember, I hadn't let myself feel anything past about 2 at this point. So 6 or 7 feels like I'm not going to live past this, right?
Yeah.
I'm getting to a level of jealousy that's climbing now to 8, 9, and I've hit 10. And I'm like, by the end of this, Joel and I will no longer be together and he will leave me for this woman. And at the time I was like 5 months pregnant, right? I'm like planning how I'm going to be a single mother.
All in the span of like 5 minutes.
Right, like, less than, I'm sure. I'm sure it was like happening in like 90 seconds. So I'm like, I'm going to be a single mother and it's going to be awful and Joel's totally going to leave me for this woman, right? So I'm feeling the unbearable fire of jealousy at 10 and I feel like my skull is being like split open and I'm not going to survive this. And then it starts going down.
Yeah.
And I'm at 9 now, and now I'm at 8, and now I'm at 7, and now I'm like at 5, and I'm kind of laughing at myself, and now I'm like at 4, 3, 2, and I'm like, oh my God, what was that all about? Right? I'm like, a single mother, right? And it's done. And it's over. And I never experienced that particular jealousy again for that particular person. Now, I've experienced it for other women in other contexts and other situations. But in that moment, oh no, it was done. It was like it was over. And it wasn't like the situation changed, right? Like the person was still in front of us, but I changed. And it was fascinating that I didn't force myself to get caught in a loop. And I had no reason to smuggle it. And I could come tell you about it and we could discuss it. And I remember it being a very mature conversation. I'm hoping my memory is accurate.
It was. It was great. Yeah.
But yeah.
I think of, it's kind of that old, if you're angry, count to 10. And like, go ahead and feel the anger, but count to 10 before you do anything about it, feeling. Or thought, and I think of the old Donald Duck cartoon where he buys this like anger management machine that like kicks him in the leg, and then he's got to try to count to 10 and not get angry. But it's kind of like that. You're basically giving yourself some time to process fully an emotion and experience, and this is exactly what I was talking about. Thank you for bringing up the loop. To go through the experience, and then you're less likely to smuggle it later in a way that's unhealthy for you if you can feel and process through an emotion in the moment when you're feeling it. I think that's very healthy. It's very powerful. It takes practice, though.
It's a skill.
It takes discipline.
It's not just an awareness, it's a skill.
Exactly.
It needs to be exercised. It's a muscle that needs to be built.
And one is going to probably mess up a couple times or like still have some unhealthy... I still do it. We all have this unhealthy expression of emotion. But I think as you begin to build that skill, awareness with, like you're talking about, a skill... eventually it becomes more and more processed, more and more managed, and you're expressing those emotions, those very strong emotions that are real emotions that have real meaning behind them sometimes in healthy ways that are productive and co-creative with the person you're maybe experiencing the toward or the situation, instead of just having kind of this blah, crazy smuggle experience.
This emotional vomiting. There is one warning that comes with understanding the donkey smuggle or the emotional smuggle. The warning is that if you choose to use this in your relationship, like if you're in a pair bond relationship and you choose to use this, you can start weaponizing this concept of the smuggle.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that's what they call the double smuggle, but there is a double smuggle. There's like smuggling inside of smuggling. It gets real complicated. However, one of the biggest, caveats is that you don't use it as a weapon against your mates. Start out by only observing your own smuggles. Don't graduate to the more dangerous element of calling out your mate's smuggles. Like, keep it to just you calling out your own. Or way later, like after the situation is no longer tense or intense, when you kind of calm down and you're in a better space, then you can say, hey, I noticed that you smuggled, this and this and this. And it's not a weapon at that point. But really, like, every tool can be used to weaponize. You can build a house with a hammer, or you can bludgeon somebody to death with it. So make sure that you're not weaponizing this concept of the donkey smuggle.
Well, and I think the person that you're calling that out to will let you know that somewhat pisses them off. You're like, well, you're actually blah, 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 smuggling this and that. That's not going to go well.
No.
I guarantee it. It's going to be really bad for you and the other person. It's going to make things worse.
It's all going to end in tears. It's going to be bad.
Yeah. So what do you think? Let us know. We want to hear from you. Come over to personalityhacker.com, go to our Facebook page or our Twitter feed. You can find both of those links on the Personality Hacker website. Leave a comment, ask a question. Let us know, that you're listening and that you're here. And we want some feedback from you too.
Yeah, and I'd love to know what people have observed themselves smuggling.
Yeah.
Like, I'd love to know how people are seeing this, evidence itself in their own lives.
What's your story in donkey smuggling your emotions? So, I'm Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
This has been the Personality Hacker Podcast. We are going to talk to you on the next episode.